In the MCU, Red Skull allied himself with the Nazis and became so disfigured even Hitler didn't want him around because he was too creepy. That's really saying something. It might even make us feel bad for him, if not for the aforementioned Nazi thing. But the Russo brothers are borderline obsessed with Red Skull, so it's possible Infinity War isn't the last time we've seen him. Could he have been up to some trickery when he encountered the Mad Titan last? Let's find out. They say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and for some reason the Russo brothers just can't get enough of Red Skull. It might be that endearing smile of his, MCU fans were first introduced to the character in Captain America: The First Avenger. There we saw him transform from a Nazi named Johann Schmidt to the Red Skull of Hydra. Kind of a lateral career move if you ask us. Although he was allied with the Nazis, he was more interested in utilizing their powers and resources for his own means. He didn't believe the ideal race existed, but that it could be brought about via technological advancements. This set him on the path to the Infinity Stone, and we all know how well that ends up turning out for most people. But could this mission have put him at odds with another powerful entity in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? At the end of the First Avenger, Red Skull grabs the Space Stone and then disappears. Not only does he vanish, but he does so for decades. Much to the dismay of many Marvel fans. Even if you're not a fan of Red Skull, you had to wonder where he was unless you're a fan of loose ends. But during one of the most shocking moments of Avengers Infinity War, Red Skull showed up alive and well, if not in a particularly good mood. It turns out that the Space Stone had sent him to Vormir in order to act as a guardian of the Soul Stone, and apparently, this career change also necessitated a drastic uniform change for Red Skull. Everyone knows what happens next. But here's a quick reminder. Red Skull tells Thanos he has to sacrifice someone he loves in order to possess the Soul Stone, and Gamora starts gloating because she's confident Thanos doesn't love anyone but himself. Yeah, being wrong doesn't feel great, but it feels better than having someone toss you off a cliff to your doom. Thanos sacrifices Gamora for the Soul Stone, and the movie continues on. But was this exchange between Red Skull and Thanos really as simple as most people think? Or was there something else going on here? The Infinity Stones can be difficult to track, since they show up in many different movies under various different names. It's also known as the Tesseract or the Cube, but those are really the names for the container which holds the Space Stone if you want to get technical. And as far as we're concerned, technically is the best kind of correct. We learned more about it during Captain America: The First Avenger, namely that it was powerful and Johann Schmidt really wanted to get his hands on it. But we've learned a lot more about its history, including that it wasn't always located on Earth, waiting to fall into the wrong hands. In fact, it was once owned by someone who lived far outside of this world, Odin of Asgard. At one point, the Space Stone was considered the jewel of Odin's treasure room, but somehow after that point, it ended up on Earth. Exactly how it was left there has always been a bit unclear, but could it be possible that Odin simply misplaced it and decided it wasn't worth worrying about when he went back to Asgard? After all, it's not like the guy was lacking in the treasure department. Except that the Space Stone isn't just a shiny bauble, which Odin was clearly well aware of. It has the power to transport people and objects across vast distances instantaneously, and its usefulness as a power source is unmatched. During Captain Marvel, we saw Mar-Vell use it to create a light-speed engine, and when that exploded, it was able to transfer incredible powers to Carol Danvers. Basically, it was irresponsible at best for Odin to leave such an immensely powerful object on Earth, where it could easily fall into the wrong hands, and that is exactly what happened to it. But it's also possible that Odin felt the Space Stone was safer on Earth than in his own vault. Unlike the Space Stone, the Soul Stone doesn't have a long and involved history in the MCU. At least not that we know of. While we've seen the other stones pop up at various times, the Soul Stone was always a mystery. Now we know that it was hiding out atop Vormir, but where was it before that? Is it possible that it was once in the possession of Odin? When transferring the Reality Stone to the Collector, it became clear the Asgardians knew keeping multiple Infinity Stones together was a bad idea. Could they have learned this lesson because their ruler once tried to do so? We have a feeling messing with the Infinity Stones is kind of the lesson you only have to learn one time. Just ask Red Skull. If Odin decided to get rid of his Infinity Stone collection, it makes sense he'd have to split them up. He stuck the Space Stone on Earth and the Soul Stone near Vormir. But although he seemingly abandoned the Space Stone, it's possible he still felt somewhat responsible for it. At the end of the First Avenger, Red Skull tries to obtain the Space Stone and it sends him to Vormir. Was it the Space Stone that decided to punish Red Skull? Or could it have been a bit of Asgardian magic? In the scene involving the Soul Stone during Infinity War, we saw a light behind Thanos when he sacrificed Gamora. It looks surprisingly similar to the one created from an Asgardian bridge, perhaps hinting that, although he's gone, the magic of Odin lives on, and that's not the only strange and unusual thing that takes place during this scene. Just consider for a moment how Red Skull greets Thanos. These two characters have never interacted before, and there's no reason they would have ever heard about each other before the involvement of the Infinity Stones. Yet when the Red Skull greets Thanos, he not only knows him by name, but he calls him Thanos, son of Allahs. Now that's a name which is unfamiliar to many Marvel movie fans, let alone Red Skull. It's clear that he was somehow filled in on a lot of context regarding the Mad Titan. Although this was the first mention of Lars we heard in the MCU, he's a comic book character who's indeed the father of Thanos. He and his wife, Sui-san, had two sons, Thanos and the much more likable Eros. In fact, Thanos was so unlikable that it turns out even his mother couldn't love him, and he eventually turned his wrath on her. Yeah, Thanos may be a terrible father, but he didn't exactly have the greatest parenting examples. The point is that if the Red Skull knew who Thanos' dad was, then it stands to reason he knows the whole rest of his history as well. Mostly the parts about how Thanos wants to obtain all the Infinity Stones and wipe out half of all life in the universe, we're assuming. And the thing is, that coincides pretty nicely with Red Skull's plans. Although we hadn't seen him in the MCU for quite some time, it's hard to imagine his disposition has improved since the First Avenger. Back then he was focused on creating a master race, defeating our heroes and generally being villainous. Losing half of the universe's population would most likely benefit the Red Skull tremendously. The ensuing chaos would give rise to evil opportunities, and many of those who oppose him would be eliminated. And Thanos? He doesn't want Earth. It's not like he's going to be sticking around where he could potentially pose a threat to Red Skull and whatever his goals are. Whether it was because of some latent Asgardian magic or due to the will of the Infinity Stones themselves, the last time Red Skull tried to possess one, it didn't go too well for him. Even someone as powerful as Thanos and his Black Order faced considerable opposition when trying to get a hold of the Infinity Stones. Think about how frustratingly close our heroes came to defeating Thanos during Infinity War. It's possible that, during his long wait on Vormir, Red Skull had time to consider the likelihood of him being able to collect all of the Infinity Stones. He clearly knew Thanos was coming as well as the past of the Mad Titan. It's likely Red Skull realized that Thanos had the superior strengths and resources needed to succeed at this daunting task. If Red Skull had been able to take the Soul Stone for himself, he must have known it'd only be a matter of time before Thanos came for him. And you don't have to be a genius to know that likely wouldn't have ended up particularly well for the Red Skull. Instead, Red Skull bided his time on Vormir, waiting for Thanos to show up. Red Skull told Thanos he had to make a sacrifice in order to obtain the Soul Stone. But is this guy really the most reliable source of information? Red Skull could have easily made up this information in order to manipulate Thanos into getting rid of Gamora. Why? Well, Gamora is a hero, but she's not one who's ever been particularly focused on Earth. It seems unlikely she'd ever have opposed Red Skull directly, but getting rid of Gamora clearly did weaken Thanos to some extent. We saw this at the end of Infinity War when he told adorable little Gamora that his victory had cost him everything. Causing Thanos to destroy Gamora meant the universe had one less hero and one of its greatest villains is considerably weakened. Plus, don't forget about all the other children of Thanos who lost their lives during Infinity War. They may not have had the dubious honor of being Thanos' favorite kid, but they were still powerful adversaries. In a weird way, the Earth is a more hospitable place for villains than ever before, and that includes Red Skull. According to the Russo Brothers, this villain is now completely free to leave Vormir, and he could be pretty much anywhere. In addition, he's free to pursue his own desires. Maybe his sights are still set on an Infinity Stone, or perhaps he'll figure out another way to get what he wants. If he really did manage to convince Thanos to destroy his favorite daughter, then he's a far more dangerous enemy than we previously thought. And don't get us wrong, we thought he was plenty powerful before seeing him in Infinity War. Although the Russo brothers seem to hint that the Red Skull may be after an Infinity Stone, we have to say, hey, good luck with that. Well, not literally. It'd be pretty terrible if he managed to get his hands on one. Taking one of the stones away from Thanos would be exceptionally difficult under the best of circumstances. But just how much does the Red Skull know about what's going to happen in the MCU? He knew all about Thanos, including information the rest of us didn't. He also seemed to be expecting him when he showed up. Perhaps he also knows what's going to happen in Avengers Endgame, and where the Infinity Stones will end up after Thanos inevitably loses them at some point. Letting Thanos have the Infinity Stones may seem like a step backward, but the Red Skull is definitely playing the long game here. Why fight harder when you can fight smarter by biding your time and waiting for the right time to strike? Somehow we think we haven't seen the last of the Red Skull, and his appearance in Infinity War may have been even more insidious than we originally thought. What do you think about the interactions between Red Skull and Thanos during Infinity War? Was Red Skull simply following the instructions of the Soul Stone, or was he working on his own agenda? Let us know what you think in the comments section, and then click on the subscribe button for more from CBR. Bye for now.